Okay, good morning, everybody. Make sure this is working. Yes, it is. Awesome. My name is Samantha Mirabal, and I am with the applications team here at Melco. And this is our design shop talk where we're going to answer any questions you have. So feel free to type in questions into the little comments or to email them in to applications@melco.com, and we'll try to get your questions on the next video. I know next time we have these, good morning, Edith. Next time we'll do this will be in December because we're taking off next week for Thanksgiving. So hope everyone has a good holiday. Good morning, Gina. All right, so for questions, I didn't get a ton, but I have some good questions that were sent in. So one was, can you show us group names after you send it to the machine? I got the file made, but I'm not sure if I did something wrong because it just kept on going with the next name. So that's a setup issue on the machine itself. I am remoted into my machines, but other people are working in my office right now. So I took some screenshots, and if they're not enough, then what I'll do is go back and pull it up on the machine. So if you remember from last week, let me pull up that file so you can see it. Last time I made a monogram. It's somewhere here. Let's see. That was from last week. Okay, so last week I made this file. All right, and it was just a basic monogram, and in there what we did was we set up group names. We added some initials. The number 4 was because that monogram, that's that block. We sent them over here. We set it to do design, name, repeat, all within one file. So then what I did is I went over and loaded this file onto my machine. And where's my PowerPoint? It's here somewhere. Sorry. Okay. Okay, so then I went to my PowerPoint here and loaded the file into the machine, and all my initials are stacked on top of one another. When you go to set it up to run the colors, I double click on the color sequence or click on color sequence, and over here pops up your color settings. So what we want to do, each color change that you see here is actually a monogram. All right, so color 1 is the first name, color 2 is the second name, color 3 is the third, color 4 is the fourth. So what we do, I'm glad these are helpful. So what we do is we set color 1 and hold. All right, then you hit apply OK. That's assuming all your colors are the same. If you know your monograms are going to be different colors, you could go 1, hold, then whatever color you want for the number 2, and just cycle through them to get all 4 color changes in there. So what will happen is when you run the machine, it'll sew the first design, and then it will stop sewing. All right, at that point, you would take your hoop off, put your next garment on, and hit go again, and it will sew color 2, which is your second monogram. Once it finishes that, it will hold. Good morning and happy Friday, everybody. All right, so after that hold, the machine again will stop. You can remove the hoop, put your third garment on, hit start. It'll run color 3 when it gets to the hold again. Notice I didn't plug 4 colors in, even though this is a 4-color design. You don't have to. If all I did for a 4-color design was 1 and nothing else, then it will just keep on looping back through. So it'll go color 1, color 1, color 1, color 1, and it'll just keep on repeating that same color over and over for all the color changes. If you wanted to do like red and then black and then red and then black, I could program it red, hold, black, hold. So color monogram 1 and 3 would be red, color 2 and 4, which would be my second and fourth monogram, would be black. So just hold is what is going to stop the machine. If you hit applique, not only does the machine stop, so if instead of using the word hold, I use applique, instead of the machine just stopping and sitting there until you hit the green button again, it will stop, and then the hoop will come out from under the needle case and sit there waiting for you. When you hit start again, it'll pull it back into position, and it will go for the next color. Okay, does that help with the group names? I hope so. If not, I can, like I said, I can go switch over to the machine, but we might have to wait till they're done messing with one because there's 4 machines on that computer. All right, well, I hope that helps some. All right, is it possible to just pull comp on just one letter in a name? There's no dumb question, so no need to ever put that. All right, so that was another question we got, and absolutely. All right, so pull compensation is what's used to adjust the fact that embroidery is going to shrink, right? So as you sew columns, the columns get narrower. So you want to compensate for that. So what you want to do is, well, I guess I'll use this because we have multiple letters. So let's say just on letter T, I want to adjust that. So first off, it's text. So how do I select just one item instead of the whole thing? Well, I click on the object I want to modify. So you always have to select whatever you're going to edit. And you'll notice there's X's on each letter. All right, so if I click on the X, now it highlights just the letter T. So I can go in and add pull compensation. And you'll notice it moved it around, so I'm going to have to play with it some. But it'll modify whatever I tell it to do. Okay, now pull offset is usually what I use. It's an adder rather than a multiplier. So the benefit that I always see with that is rather than it distorting the design, it just makes it bolder. Okay, so I highly prefer offset over pull comp by percent, just because I've seen pull comp by percent. One, the really narrow spots hardly get any compensation, and then the really thick areas where you don't necessarily need a ton overcompensate, and it just distorts designs. Is what I often find. Is instructions on how to do group names in another video that was typed in. Yeah, last week we covered that, and there's also a really good group names video that was done on a dedicated webinar. So hopefully someone can type that in, but if someone from Elko doesn't, I'll type it in when we're done. Okay, rather than me searching for it now. So I'll give you a link for that. Okay, so there's a question about how to do applique, tack downs, and all that. So yes, the same thing that I just covered over here. So if I want to do applique work, this is the same thing. You can use hold or applique, but anytime you want the machine to stop so that you can go lay fabric down, change hoops, pull the hoop off, trim something, whatever it might be, you can use hold or applique. I use applique every day, all day long, because it pulls it out, and most of the time when I'm doing applique work, I'm grabbing my scissors and cutting around things. Okay, so on there, I like the hoop to come out so I can avoid unhooping it just for speed. But yes, that's the same thing you can do. There's no sew repeat. Let's see, there's another thing. All right, so we're going to actually set up an applique file, Edith, so because that was another question that was sent in, so we'll get to that one through here. All right, so we talked about adjusting pull comp in just one letter in a name. All right, so here's a question that's kind of related to what you're asking. It says, if I want to use my Cricut to cut applique letters, how do I set it up in DesignShop to stitch them down? Okay, so I really quickly made some stuff, and I haven't played with it, so you get to see me fumble around for fun. All right, so what I did is I went into Illustrator, just because that's the program I'm most comfortable with, to create some basic art, and I'm very unoriginal, and I went ahead and just used my name. Of course, I should have had this opened, but that's all right. All right, so whatever art you're going to do, you want to go create it. So if you're going to do something with Cricut, you probably already have a file you're going to go cut, right? So let's say this one is what I want to applique down as fabric. All right, so you want to make, just like with Cricut, you would want to make, or I don't have a Cricut, so I don't know their software. I use a laser personally. I also have a Silhouette, so I can do it either way, but it's the same general principle. You would want to get an outline of what you want. I did this in Illustrator. It's just basic text that was converted to outlines and then welded. So I know all the softwares do that, so I merged it together to create just a vector of whatever it is I want. Okay, so once you have that, you can of course go to your cutter of choice to cut your fabric. So just for completeness, like I said, really quick did this so I could show you guys. You would go to wherever you're going to cut it, load it, and I do this with a laser. It's really whatever you want. If you're going to use a Cricut, a Silhouette, Graphtec, a Eyeline, there's a bunch. Yeah, Edith will cover that. All right, so we'll cut this out. All right, so now I have fabric cut. How do I sew it down? That was the question. So we've got to set up the file in DesignShop. So I'm going to go back to DesignShop and open up. Do I already have it open? No, I don't. All right, File. Let's open up that. Okay. So I've got my outline. I'm going to delete these because I don't want them. All right. So I've got that same vector that was created in Illustrop I have here. So to actually create your applique, you have to think about how it is you want to sew it down. Typically, so if I just imagine this is at the machine, what would I do? Well, of course, I'd hoop my garment, my fabric, whatever I want. And then I would want it to do a placement stitch so I know what I'm going to sew down. So that's the first thing we have to create. The quickest way I like to do it is just hold down my Shift key and click on the walk normal. Okay, the walk input method. Oops, there we go. Shift, walk input. Select this one, Shift, click on the walk input method. And I'm going to merge those together. Turn this off so you can see what we have. All right, so it did leave off, so my vector was created weird, so I'm just going to quick draw the rest of this one so I have it. Okay, so now I have a placement stitch. What do I use that for? So when I go to create my file, over here, my first stitch, I would just sew it down. I usually choose the fabric color, and then I hit applique. So instead of hold, it would say applique. Now, I sew it out. What's next? I want the machine to stop so I can take my fabric and stick it down. So I'd go get the item that was pre-cut in whatever software. Like I said, I just cut it with my laser because that's what I have set up. And you lay down your fabric within that outline. All right, so that's cute. Now it's laid there, but now we have to tack it down. So it really depends on how you want to tack it down, what kind of look you want. So you just plan that out. Do you want it to be a satin stitch around it? Do you want to just do like a tackle zigzag edge? You know, that's a design choice, right? So I'm going to start with this S, and let's say we want to just do a tackle. All right, well, again, just for simplicity, I hold the Shift key. That Shift key trick I was showing you is the same thing as right here, where it's change element from one type to another. This just lets you think about it rather than having to know the hotkeys. So, but it does the same thing. So I'm going to say change element type from, it's currently a walk, which is just a running stitch, right? I want to change it to a single line because that's going to be what I'm going to use for my tackle stitch. And I don't want to replace my walk, I just want to add to it. So I say add, and now I have to rearrange it and give it another color. All right, so we've got all our placements. If I turn that off now, I've got a satin stitch. Well, I would usually just change this to a tackle and then change that to something wider. What number should you use? It's a personal preference. I like tackle stitches, you know, roughly 25 to 30, somewhere in there. If I'm doing satin, I prefer 40 to 45 for the width. What's the right answer? Whatever works best for you and whatever looks pretty to you. You'll find everybody has different opinions on how something should go. All right. And as a reminder, if you see me randomly looking over this way, it's because I'm looking to make sure that no questions came in that I missed. All right. Okay, so we have our placement. We have our tackle. So we program it, color 1, applique. Color 2 would be my zigzag. And if that's all you want is just a tackle finish, yay, you're done. Okay. Well, what if you want, instead of a tackle finish, you just want like a bean stitch inside the letter? What do you do then? Well, let's turn back on the vector and look at that. So if I want to stitch inside this shape, how far do you stitch in? Again, it's how are you going to secure the fabric? If you're going to use a spray adhesive or if you're going to use a peel and stick twill that has like a laminate on the back, sticky PSA on the back, pressure sensitive adhesive that you peel and stick, that's going to hold still better and you're not going to have to worry about shifting and that sort of thing. So what you can always do is go offset and offset it to the inside. So let's say I want to do just 5 points in. So now, oops, let me undo that because what I want to leave that shape. so you can see it. All right, so I'm going to offset this one. Object, offset, -5. Okay. Now look, I have it offset inside of it. Is 5 enough? For me it is. For others it may not be. It really depends on how you're cutting the fabric, how it frays and whatnot. I would say, I don't know, 7 to 15 maybe for most folks. So just try it on something simple and see what works best for you. All right, so now that I have that vector, again, I can either do the change element from one type to another, say walk input, add. So again, I would have my placement. I'd lay the fabric down, and then I would sew this one, which that's a walk stitch, which is just one. Well, why don't we change it to a bean? Now it's a bean of 3. Okay. You can also do that followed by a tackle. So let's say you just want to hold it down so you can go lay the rest of these fabrics down and then do all your tackles at once. That's another technique. It's what if I want to satin stitch over this one? Well, the easiest is just to copy and paste or duplicate this. Give it another color. Why do I give it different colors even if it is the same color? That's so I can program in color changes. Okay, so let's see. There we go. So now I've got a satin stitch, pretty wide, and my colors are hideous, but you get the idea. So I'd get my placement stitch, I'd stop the machine by again clicking on hold or applique, one of these buttons, and it would put there. Now that it's stopped, my second color would be either however I program, or I just digitize the file. So in this case, color 2 is just a bean stitch on the fabric itself. All right, so I would then run this bean stitch. I can then put another applique, so I can go ahead and digitize the rest of these the same way. Or I can go straight into my tackle, which is a zigzag to hold the edges down, and then a satin stitch over the top. All right, does that make sense? I hope it does. Okay, so you would do the same thing for the rest of the stuff, right? So I did it with the letter S just because it's contained and I can keep it on the one screen. But it's the same general technique. All right, type in any other questions and I'll go look at the other ones we have. All right. The only other thing I can't answer is how to use your Cricut. Hopefully you know how to trace things in there. But you know, you'd set it up, bring in the same file you traced over there into DesignShop and work from it. What size needles are the needles that came with the machine, and can we purchase them? Of course you can. The needles are DBX K5 is the needle system, so DBX K5. So that's kind of what the system of needles there are. It's a commercial round shaft needle. They come with 2 sizes, a 7511 or a 65-9. The 75-11 I find the most commonly used one, but it really depends on what your applications are and which needles you use the most of. I know they come with the gold needles, which are titanium plated. So what you would do is go look at Grossbecker's, I believe, are the ones that ship with that ship in the little maintenance kit, and you can go buy them all kinds of places. But it's a Grossbecker. The Madeira brand ones are also made by the same company, Grossbecker, and of course I'm probably butchering how that's pronounced. Sorry. The Oregon needles are another one, but they're titanium coated 7511s. Balls or sharps, and there's all kinds of points in between. I use balls most commonly, unless you're doing hats, then sharps. So whatever your application might be. I need help loading fonts into DesignShop. It's kind of a loaded question or a loaded statement, because fonts come, what type of fonts? So if it's an OFA font, which is native to DesignShop, that's one thing. Or if you're talking about new file, if I go create text, blah, and what I'm trying to do are these true type fonts, that's another. So there's all these fonts that are basically computer fonts, if you will. All right, so there's those. So the computer fonts are one thing. You would go get your true, it's the extension is TTF. and from wherever you get fonts from. I recommend buying them with commercial license. You can get fonts from places like Hungry JPEG. It doesn't matter. Why do I use balls for most jobs except for hats? Why? Mainly because they work fine for me and they do less damage to the fibers. Is just what I've seen. So the sharps tend to poke through things. The only exceptions to me going to from balls to sharps would be aggressive materials or poor digitizing practices. So if I bought, because I still buy designs and things like that. So when I buy designs, if I really want to sew it and I don't want to redo it myself, and it's done where the layers are stacked up, fill upon fill upon fill, well, that's easy enough to go fix, but I could just kind of batter through it with sharp needles. Really, I kind of look at sharps as what I use for things that are thick, harder to get through, because I need that kind of knife blade to push through it. Whereas balls kind of just move the fabric around, and I don't require that kind of cutting effect, if you will. Let's see. There was a question typed in. That's what I'm reading. You covered applique letters from a vector. I may have missed the very beginning, but can you do the same thing with shop design? Sure. Let's do that. Okay, so I'm going to close this mess. Oh, I was talking about fonts, so I'll get back to that. But these questions on the screen, they leave where I can see them, so that's why I keep on looking. All right, stock design shops, how do I make an applique? Okay, so I'm going to create a letter, very original here, an S. All right, and you can see that's just kind of ugly, but that's okay. So what I want to do is use this as my basic outline for the letter. I'm going to make it big, a 3-inch wide, so that's a big S. And what I'm going to do is hold my control key down, and let's do shift. And I'm going to go to shift vector fill, and now I've got my vector. So now I can also, I don't have to do that. I just like working on it, so I have it to simulate the fabric. Okay, so now I've got something that kind of looks like it. If you don't do it that way, I could just select the letter, hold my shift key down and say walk input method. And now I've got a placement. So that's my walk normal of where my fabric's going to go. Then I can again copy paste that, change type to be a single line, and this time I'll replace it and give it another color, change it to tackle so I get that zigzag effect, and then this is how wide that tackle is. I don't know about you, but when I do applique work, if this is really narrow, it almost seems like the fabric, it depends on the fabric and how you cut it, but it frays out and you don't get it held down very well. So to avoid that, I like making this wider. Okay, so now I have a placement stitch, a zigzag to hold it down, and I can copy and paste that again. I did that way, Control C, Control V on my keyboard. And this time I'm going to go to just a satin stitch, and let's make it wider. So I'll do 40 and give it another color change. While the color changes, if this is all one color, which even if I'm sewing it with one color, if I do that all as one color, what will happen is I don't get any place where I can program in a hold or an applique stop on the machine. Okay, so what you'll want to do is make sure you're giving these individual color changes so that as you're sewing, you have the opportunity to program in those stops that hold that applique, one of those. Okay. To add an outline to an embroidery file, is that the same method as you just did? It depends. Let me show you what I mean. If what you're asking is this, designs, all right, let's do the balloon. I like the balloon. All right, so let's say I want to add an outline around this. There's no magic way to do that. I have to click my walk input. use my left clicks and right clicks and trace around it. Okay, so all I'm doing is left click and right click. The dots are curved points. Those are right clicks. Left clicks are straight points. Okay, so you literally just trace around your shape using left clicks for straight points, right clicks for curves. Let's see what else. Okay, so that's all I'm doing here is left click, right click around my shape. Right clicking, and I'm eyeballing it. If you want better, you know, if I really was trying to trace it on the actual shape, I should zoom in and not do it from way back here. So you can always do that. Okay, so there we go. Almost there. Now, hit it. Anyone know the trick to close the shape? So if I want, I can click over there. That's one. But if I just want the point I'm at now to connect to the starting point, I can hold the shift key down and hit enter, and that will automatically close the shape for me. So you can see it closed it without me having to choose the points. Okay, so now I have a shape, an outline of that. What can I do with this? Well, there was a question that was sent in on email. I got it before, like literally 2 minutes before this, so I haven't had a chance to really go watch the video that was sent in as well. So I'll do that and we'll recover this next time in case I'm missing something. But in my really quick read, there was a question that was sent in of how do we do an outline, an underlay if I'm going to do patches on a hat. Okay, so let's pretend this is a patch, you know, a commercial patch I had done somewhere else or I made myself, whatever, and I want to tack it down on a garment, a hat, a something. Well, what you can do is if you have an outline, and let's say you want to just do a underlay there, well, I can take that same outline and either use my shift trick, shift and click on select complex fill. All right, that's one way. Obviously, I wouldn't sew it like this, but I could do shift click. I can click on the change element from one type to another, whatever. And at this point, you got to decide what it is you want. If you're going to put it down as kind of a foundation to hold down and just mark where it's going, there's no reason to do a full fill like this. So what you could do is treat it similar to like a primer stitch, where you can turn on Trapunto and trace border, make this something larger. So let's say like 30, and I'm going to make the border margin 0, the same density that I had up there, and I'm going to turn off this one. And let's make this, instead of 45, I'll make it 90. All right, so what did that just do? All right, and I'll go back and redo it. Let me make this another color so I can turn off the other stuff. Okay, so what did that do? Well, it created this for me, a little foundation. All right, so if I double click on this and just show you the properties again, since I kind of ran fast through that, I told it to be a fill. So that was my shift and click on this. The density, what density should you use? Whatever you want. It's if you want it closer together, you do the density smaller. If you want it further apart, you don't want a whole lot of tack down, you'd increase this. So if I did 50, notice my lines get further apart from one another. And the ones that go perpendicular to that, that's what this 90 degree is, perpendicular to that top stitch. So if I want them to be exact squares, I would want to go like that. Okay. So it's the border margin of 0, that's so that my secondary stitch, which is perpendicular to the top, goes all the way to the edge of my outline. If you don't want it going to the edge, I'm going to exaggerate it with a really big number. Don't do this. But notice my lines don't all the way go to the edge. Okay. So by 0, it'll go all the way to the edge. So now what you could do is sew this down, grab your patch. So how would you digitize this? All right. Assuming this was the balloon here was a pre-made patch. All right. So what would I do? How would I program this to sew the patch down? Well, I could run this stitch. That's kind of my placement of where the patch goes. Secure it down either using an adhesive, pins. If you're going to use pins, be careful that you don't sew over them. Needles don't like running over needles. All right. So somehow, so you'd sew that. You'd hit applique on the machine. That will stop the garment, pull it out, or hold if you're working on hats or things like that. And then now we need a tack down for it. So how do I create my tack down? Well, I'm going to do this. Change element from one type to another. I'm going to say normal stitch first, and I'm going to add one. And the only thing with that is it's right on the edge, which remember, you know, I would need to make it smaller. So if I just shift and scale, notice it's not even all the way around. I need to use offset to make it even. And offset only works with fills. So I can, before I convert it, copy, paste, give it a new color, object, offset, however much you want it to go in. So let's say 10 points. I'm going to delete that other one and now convert this one over. Change element from one type to another. Let's say a normal stitch, replace. Yay. All right, so what did we do? I've got my first stitch. Now I've got a placement to hold it down. I hope I'm not confusing folks and this is actually helpful. Help. All right, well, that's a single stitch around. I don't know about you, but when I'm sewing things down, I want a little more security than one piece of thread. So you do a retrace, or you can copy and paste that, turn it to a bean stitch maybe, and get rid of the retrace. So this one will give you 1 stitch. That one will give you 3 more. So net effect is 4 rows of stitching all the way around. Okay, so back to the font question. How do you get fonts in? You would, if it's just a straight TTF, you'd look for it. Do I have one? No, I'd have to go download one, and I really don't want to do that. So you go find a font from, like I said, but I recommend if you're going to use it for commercial purposes, buying with a commercial license. But that's however you want to do it. Go find your font with an extension .ttf. You would close DesignShop, double click on it, and install it to Windows. Once it's installed, now you can come over to open up DesignShop, and whatever font you installed will now show up in this category true type. Okay, so all of these are ones that I bought or came with a computer or something. Okay, so then you can use these to type them in. Now, if the question really was, how do I bring in purchased fonts, like, let me go find my example. Things I've bought. Where's fonts? There, fonts. Okay, so let's say this font. If this is really what you have, which is a whole bunch of individual files, there's no easy way to do it. You just import one file at a time. So let's say I'd go find a D, or yeah, that's a D, I think. Yeah, so I'd import them one at a time. So there's my first one, then I go import my other one, and put them together. Okay. So not a ton of fun, but that's how you can do with it. That's how you have to do them when you get them in separate files. Another trick you can use if they're BX ready fonts, Google how to use BX fonts, because there's some free software that you can at least type it in and save it off as a DST to stop you from having to individually bring in one file at a time to line them up. Okay. Let's see, what other questions? I don't see any others typed in. Oh, I closed my PowerPoint. Oops. All right, let's try this again. Swap presenter. Make this so I can see my questions. Sorry, pardon me here. Okay. How do I make a satin stitch thicker? Okay, so let's look at that. Let's make a satin stitch first. So there's a bunch of different satin stitch types. There's a single line. A single line is a constant width column. Okay, column being row of stitches from one side to the other, back and forth. All right, so if I draw a single line, however you want it drawn, okay, that's a pretty thin satin stitch. You can put it in 3D so you can see it, zoom in. How do I make it wider? Well, right here, because that's a single line, every stitch is the same length. That's right here in the properties. You can get to it up on the top screen in the dynamic property bar, or you can double click on single line center and go into the properties under single line, where you can change it to be a 40-point column. Okay, so when it's center, that means half the width goes off of the line I drew, which was a single one line I drew, and then it puts 40-point width, 20 points this way, 20 points that way. If you tell it to be a single line left, all 40 points of the width go to the left of the line I drew. Single line right, imagine that. It goes 40 points of width all the way to the right of the line I drew. And then, of course, you can do a custom where you tell it to split it unevenly one way or the other. Okay, so that's if it's a single line. So that's pretty basic. You just change the width. All right. Well, if you have a column, like a column 1 or a column 2, column 1's column 2, those allow you to change widths variably, right? So I can create all kinds of different shapes, and they vary. So I can make it go from thin to thick and things like that. Well, if you want to change the width of this, well, what options do you have? Well, you can go into each point individually and move them around. Okay, that's kind of slow and you might not do it evenly, right? Another way is you can go into properties and under pull compensation, add offset. All offset's going to do is it's going to say, instead of stitching the stitch right there, I want to stitch, make it wider, overstitch just a little bit so that it's bolder. So I'm going to over exaggerate this with a ridiculous number that you shouldn't use, just so you can see it. So watch my shape when I hit apply. All right, it's much wider. That's not 10 points of offset is a bit ridiculous. I just did that so you could see it. In general, 1 to 3 points I find to be plenty for most applications. By the time, I always find if I'm really needing to push 3 or more, well, at that point it's probably better to just redigitize my shape to be larger so that I do not have to add that much offset, particularly around curves. The more you start adding points, it starts blowing out the stitches to make them look strange. Okay, so that's how you would make your satins wider. Okay, if you do it by percent, what I was describing earlier, that can add distortions, and the easiest way to show you this is, let me draw a triangle-ish thing. All right, so I'm going to do a fill, start, stop, stitch direction. All right, so now I got a triangle. Let's zoom out so we can actually see it. There we go. All right, so if I do pull comp, let's do 150%. I got a pretty interesting shape going here now. See that? It's no longer a triangle. It's because pull comp by percent uses multiplication. So it looks at the length of the stitch from one side of the wireframe to the other in the direction you're sewing, and it adds a percentage to that length. So by the time you get down here, it's longer. It's going to add more distance than it does on these corners, which it's a really short stitch. So a large percentage of a tiny number is still a tiny number. All right. Whereas if I leave that 100 and I change this to something big, it's just making my shape bolder. Okay, so that's just why I prefer using offset for most applications. Okay, it is personal preference. All right, any other questions? I don't see any typed in. I hope this was helpful for you. Be sure to send in any questions. If the question on how to do underlay for patches, if I didn't cover that correctly after I actually read the question in more than 30 seconds, I'll add that to the next time we meet. But we've got next Friday is Black Friday, and I'll probably be in a food coma rather than doing this. So everyone have a lovely holiday, and I will talk to you guys next time after Thanksgiving, and enjoy it, have fun, happy sewing. Sending your questions either by typing in on these videos, even after the fact, I try to review the previous weeks just to see if any other questions came in to add. So, or email to applications@mailco.com. Again, my name is Samantha Mirabal, and I will talk to you guys next time. Thanks.